Eleanor Nell Hayes drives into the Pine Barrens, the foreboding forest where her brother vanished a year ago. The narrow road winds through towering pines, their twisted branches clawing at the sky as if warning her away. In the nearby town, whispers of the Jersey Devil mix with fearful stories of disappearances no one can explain. Armed with her brother's notes and her own determination, Nell ventures closer to the trees, where shadows seem to breathe and voices ride the wind. She came seeking answers, but the forest has its own secrets, ancient and hungry, waiting to be revealed. The road into the Pine Barrens was a narrow ribbon of asphalt flanked by towering pines, their skeletal branches clawing at the pale dawn sky as if warning travelers away. Eleanor Nell Hayes gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles whitening, eyes scanning the dense forest that seemed to press in from both sides. The air was thick with mist, softening the edges of the trees and muting the sounds of the waking woods. Somewhere deep within that shadowed green, her brother Tommy had vanished a year ago, swallowed whole by silence and secrets. Her car's tires hummed against the road, the engine a small defiance against the oppressive quiet. As she neared the outskirts of the small town nestled at the forest's edge, the landscape shifted. Neat front yards gave way to weathered clapboard buildings, and the scent of pine was tinged now with something older, darker. Nell parked outside a modest diner, the kind where the locals gathered in the early hours, nursing coffee and their own guarded fears. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of strong brew and fried breakfast. The chatter was low, voices dropping whenever she glanced their way. Nell sat at the counter, pulling a worn notebook from her bag. She had learned to listen first, to let the stories come to her. Early whispers spoke of the Jersey Devil, a creature of myth. Wings beating the night air, a scream that chilled the blood. But the disappearances were no myth, and the unease was tangible. "You're not from around here," a gruff voice said behind her. Deputy Marcus Flynn's face was weathered, eyes sharp beneath a furrowed brow. There was skepticism in his tone, but also a hint of something else. Protectiveness, maybe, or warning. "No," Nell replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "I'm here about my brother." Marcus's jaw tightened. Lots come looking for answers. Pines don't give them up easy. Their conversation was brief, marked by careful words and unspoken tension. The deputy's knowledge of the forest was clear, but so was his reluctance to believe in the legends Nell was chasing. Still, he offered a map and a nod toward the darker trails, unmarked paths, where the disappearances had occurred. That afternoon, Nell wandered to the forest's edge. The trees stood like sentinels, their trunks blackened with age and moss, needles whispering secrets in the restless wind. She could almost hear the forest breathing, alive with hidden eyes and shadowed movements. The sun dipped low, casting long, twisting shadows that danced unsettlingly on the forest floor. She jotted notes in her journal, fingers trembling slightly. The pines were no ordinary woods. They held stories older than the townsfolk dared speak aloud. And somewhere beneath those stories, something waited, hungry, patient, and ancient. Night fell with a sudden chill, wrapping the town in darkness that felt too thick, too close. Nell's room in the small inn was sparse, but the windows framed the looming silhouette of the pines. As she lay awake, the wind carried whispers, or were they voices? Through the trees, curling tendrils of fear that seeped into her bones. Sleep was elusive. Dreams mingled with memories of Tommy's last days. His smile haunted by obsession, his notes filled with frantic sketches of creatures and symbols. Nell knew the path ahead would test her resolve. The line between myth and reality was thinner here, and the forest shadows held more than just the night. but she was ready to confront whatever waited, for Tommy, for the truth. And as the pines whispered on, a darker presence stirred. The road had led her here, but the real journey was only beginning. Nell sat up, the journal open on her lap, pen poised for the stories the forest would tell. Outside, the darkness deepened. The whispers never ended. Eleanor Nell Hayes pushed open the heavy wooden door of the sheriff's office, the low creak echoing in the small, dimly lit room. The air smelled faintly of dust and leather, an odor that clung to the worn furniture and faded wallpaper. Behind the desk, a woman in uniform looked up from a cluttered stack of paperwork. Her eyes were sharp, no nonsense, and carried the weight of responsibility that came with keeping a small town safe. "Sheriff Linda Carraway," the woman said, her voice steady but cautious. "You're the journalist from Philly, right? Hear about your brother?" Nell nodded, clutching the strap of her backpack tighter. "Yes, I'm Eleanor Hayes. I need to ask some questions about the disappearances." Before the sheriff could respond, a door at the side opened, and a man stepped into the room, stocky and weathered, with a face shaped by years spent outdoors. His leather jacket was worn, and his eyes held a wary skepticism as they flicked from Nell to the sheriff. "Deputy Marcus Flynn," he introduced himself gruffly. "I'll be your point of contact." Nell extended her hand, and he shook it firmly but without warmth. "I've heard about your brother. Sorry, thank you," Nell said quietly. "I know he vanished in these woods, but I have to find out what happened." Marcus's jaw tightened. "A lot of folks around here don't like to talk about it, especially with outsiders." Sheriff Carraway nodded. "It's been a rough year, people scared, disappearances piling up." Nell leaned forward. "What can you tell me?" Marcus glanced out the window toward the dense pine forest that bordered the town. "People go in and don't come out. Hikers, hunters, even locals. We find nothing, no signs, no bodies, just gone. It's not natural." "Have you heard anything about the Jersey Devil?" Nell asked, watching his reaction closely. The deputy's eyes darkened. "Stories, legends. Some say it's just superstition to scare kids, but others, they swear it's real." Nell's pulse quickened. "Do you believe it?" He shrugged, a flicker of conflict crossing his face. "I don't know what to believe anymore, but I know fear when I see it, and this town's full of it." After their meeting, Nell stepped outside into the chill afternoon, the forest looming like a silent giant. She made her way to the local diner, a humble building where townsfolk gathered. The low murmur of conversation fell to hushed whispers when she entered. She caught fragments: Jersey, devil, curse, don't go near the pines. Eyes darted nervously to the windows where shadows stretched long beneath the setting sun. At a corner table, an older man spoke in a low voice to a small group. "I saw it once, years ago. Red eyes, glowing, wings like a bat, claws sharp as knives. It's watching, waiting." Nell scribbled notes, her skepticism wrestling with a growing sense of unease. The stories were more than mere folklore, they were warnings. The following day, Marcus offered to drive her along a rough, forested road. The car rattled over gravel as the towering pines closed in, their needles whispering in the breeze. Marcus recounted recent cases: missing hikers, strange noises, unexplained shadows seen at dusk. His tone mixed frustration with a reluctant belief in the unexplainable. "I want to believe there's a logical explanation," he said, eyes fixed on the road. "But every time we think we're close, something slips through." Nell looked out at the thick woods, feeling the weight of the silence pressing in. The forest seemed alive, watching. That night, alone in her rented cabin on the edge of town, Nell sat by the window, her journal open but untouched. Outside, the wind stirred the pine needles, carrying faint whispers that seemed almost human. She strained to listen, heart pounding. Were they warnings, calls for help, or something darker? Her thoughts tumbled over the stories she'd heard. The fear in the eyes of townsfolk and the unresolved mystery of her brother's disappearance. The shadows outside flickered like tentacles, reaching into her mind. Nell's voice broke the silence as she whispered, "What are you hiding?" The forest seemed to answer with a sigh, and the night deepened around her. With each passing hour, the veil between myth and reality thinned, pulling Nell deeper into a mystery where every whisper could mean death or revelation. She knew the path ahead was fraught with danger, but the truth was a beacon she could not resist. The Jersey Devil was no longer just a legend. It was a key to something far older and far more terrifying, and Nell was determined to uncover it. The forest greeted Eleanor Hayes with a silence so thick it felt almost physical, pressing against her eardrums like a weight. She stood at the edge of the Pine Barrens, the dense pines towering above her like sentinels guarding their secrets. Twilight bled through the canopy in thin, fading streaks, casting long, twisting shadows that seemed to sway with a life of their own. Nell's breath formed small clouds in the cool air as she adjusted the strap on her backpack, her eyes scanning the dimming landscape. For hours, she had been listening to the whispered warnings of the townsfolk. But now, alone among the ancient trees, those stories took on a new gravity. The disappearances weren't just local gossip or the product of overactive imaginations. They were real, tangible, and something about the forest itself felt wrong. The Jersey Devil, a name repeated in hushed tones, was only the beginning of the mystery. Nell had to know what lurked beyond the veil of superstition. Her boots crunched softly on the carpet of pine needles as she stepped deeper beneath the branches, senses alert to every rustle and shift. The wind was a ghostly breath, stirring the needles with a mournful sigh. Shadows flitted at the edges of her vision, vanishing whenever she turned to confront them. A cold prickle crawled down her spine as she realized the forest was watching her back. Nell stopped abruptly, heart hammering, as a sudden snap of a twig echoed nearby. She froze, eyes wide, trying to pierce the darkness. A shadow slipped between two trees, too quick, too fluid to be any animal she knew. It was dark and formless, but the way it moved suggested intelligence or malice. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her notebook, pulling it free to jot down the moment before the sensation passed like a fading nightmare. Back at her tentative campfire, the flickering flames cast jittering light over her journal as she scribbled notes about the strange occurrences and the growing sense of menace. The forest's sounds surrounded her, the quiet rustle of leaves, the distant call of a nightbird, the soft patter of unseen footsteps. Every noise seemed amplified by the oppressive stillness, each whisper on the wind a reminder that she was not alone. The fire crackled, sending sparks spiraling upward, and Nell's gaze drifted to the blackness beyond the firelight. What secrets did this forest keep? What ancient forces stirred beneath its roots? She paused, fingers hovering over the page, then wrote with renewed determination. Every detail mattered. Every shadow could be a clue. Suddenly, headlights cut through the darkness, a beam of light slicing the night like a blade. Deputy Marcus Flynn approached cautiously, his worn leather jacket blending into the gloom. His face, weathered and set in a skeptical frown, softened slightly as he called out. "You shouldn't be out here alone, Miss Hayes," he said, voice low but firm. "This place, it's different. Not just stories. Something's wrong." Nell looked up, meeting his gaze. I'm not here to panic, Marcus. I want to understand. He nodded slowly, the tension between them easing just enough to form an uneasy alliance. Well, then you'll need all the eyes and ears you can get. But be careful, the pines don't give up their secrets easily. As Marcus stood beside her, the forest seemed to lean in closer, the shadows deepening and shifting as if aware of their intrusion. Nell felt the pulse of the pines beneath her feet, a heartbeat older than any myth. This was no longer just a search for a missing brother. It was a descent into a living nightmare, where the line between folklore and reality blurred into darkness. And the shadows in the trees were watching, waiting. With a steadying breath, Nell closed her journal and looked into the woods beyond, the whisper of the pines promising that the true horror was only just beginning. The late afternoon sun filtered weakly through the dense canopy of the Pine Barrens, casting long, wavering shadows that seemed to shift and breathe with a restless life of their own. Eleanor Nell Hayes pulled her jacket tighter around her, the chill creeping in despite the season. Her boots crunched softly over the carpet of pine needles and dried leaves as she made her way along the narrow, winding path that led to the edge of town. Ahead, nestled among gnarled oaks and towering pines, stood a small, weather-beaten cabin, Mabel Crane's home. Nell hesitated a moment, her breath visible in the cool air, before stepping forward. The cabin's wooden walls were faded and cracked, adorned with bundles of dried herbs hanging from the eaves and the faint scent of sage permeating the air. The windows, clouded with age, caught the last golden rays of sunlight, casting a muted glow inside. Her fingers brushed the worn handle, and she rapped gently. The door creaked open, revealing a woman with a slender frame, silver hair cascading over her shoulders like a waterfall of moonlight. Mabel Crane's piercing eyes studied Nell with a mixture of curiosity and something far older, a deep knowing that seemed to reach beyond time itself. "You must be Eleanor," Mabel said, her voice low but steady. "The girl who's come to stir the old ashes." Nell swallowed, the weight of the nickname settling uneasily on her shoulders. "I'm looking for answers," she replied. "About my brother, about the disappearances, and about the Jersey Devil." Mabel's gaze softened, but a shadow passed over her face. "Answers come at a price, child. And sometimes they lead to places darker than any shadow you've known." Invited inside, Nell stepped into a room thick with the scent of dried herbs, earth, and something faintly metallic beneath it all. Shelves lined the walls, heavy with jars of roots, powders, and strange charms. The flicker of candlelight danced across faded symbols carved into wooden talismans and brittle pages of yellowed parchment pinned to the walls. Mabel gestured toward a worn armchair by the hearth. "Sit, we have much to discuss." As Nell settled into the chair, the fire's warmth battling the chill in the room, Mabel began her tale. It wasn't the Jersey Devil story Nell expected. No sharp claws or screeching wings. Instead, Mabel spoke of the forest itself, an ancient living entity with a heart blackened by forgotten sorrow and rage. "The devil you've heard of," Mabel murmured, "is but a mask, a story spun to keep the true darkness at bay. Beneath these pines lies something older, a primordial, shade-bound long ago by rites lost to time. It feeds not just on flesh, but on fear itself, growing stronger as the tales are whispered and the shadows lengthen." Nell's eyes narrowed, bound. How Mabel reached into a wooden box beside her, retrieving a faded amulet carved from dark wood. Upon it, an ancient symbol twisted in a knot of lines and circles. Her hands trembled slightly as she cradled it. A pact was made generations ago between those who lived here and the shade beneath. They traded silence and secrecy for protection. But the forest remembers, and the balance is fragile. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and sending a shiver down Nell's spine. The room seemed to darken, shadows pooling in corners where none had been moments before. "You feel it too," Mabel said softly, eyes gleaming. "The forest watches, listens, it waits, and it's hungry." Nell nodded slowly, a mixture of dread and determination settling in her chest. "Then I have to find out what happened to Tommy, to all of them." Mabel's gaze held hers, grave and unyielding. "Be careful, Eleanor. Sometimes knowing the truth is the beginning of losing yourself." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the forest into twilight, Nell stepped back onto the path. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth, but beneath it lurked something darker, an ancient breath that whispered promises and threats alike. The shadows seemed to reach out, curling at the edges of her vision. Nell swallowed hard, clutching her notebook close. The forest was alive, and its secrets were beginning to stir. She walked on, the weight of Mabel's words heavy in her mind. The Jersey Devil was only the surface. Beneath the pines, something far older and far worse was awakening, and Nell was determined to face it, no matter the cost. The fading light outside her cabin cast long shadows across the worn wooden floorboards as Eleanor Nell Hayes settled into the creaking armchair by the window. Her fingers trembled slightly, the chill in the air seeping into her bones as she unfolded a fragile, yellowed piece of paper. The paper was worn at the edges, creased deeply as if it had been folded and unfolded countless times. It was a fragment of her brother Tommy's journal, something she had found tucked away in an old box beneath the floorboards of the family home before she left for the Pine Barrens. She traced the hurried, jagged handwriting with a mixture of reverence and dread. The words were scrawled in a frenzy of fear and obsession, a testament to the unraveling of Tommy's mind in the days before he vanished. "The Jersey Devil isn't just a myth," one passage read. The ink smudged as if her brother's hand had shaken too violently to keep steady. "There's something older, something watching. I hear it in the night, in the trees. It knows." Nell's breath caught. The words echoed the whispers she had heard in town. But there was something raw and personal here, a secret only Tommy had dared to write. The scent of pine wafted through the open window, mingling with the musty aroma of old paper and ink. Outside, the forest loomed like a living entity, dark and impenetrable beneath the gathering dusk. She leaned back, the chair creaking beneath her weight, and closed her eyes for a moment. Memories surged forward unbidden. Tommy's eager face illuminated by the flickering light of a campfire, his voice animated as he shared stories of strange noises and fleeting shadows glimpsed among the pines. "You have to believe me, Nell," he had said, eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and fear. "There's something out there beyond the Jersey Devil, something older." Her heart ached with the weight of loss and unanswered questions. What had driven him so deep into the forest's secrets? What had he seen that terrified him enough to disappear without a trace? As the twilight deepened, the wind stirred the trees outside, sending a cascade of rustling leaves that sounded almost like whispered warnings. Nell's gaze snapped to the window, the shadows seeming to press against the glass like dark fingers reaching in. She shivered, pulling her jacket tighter around her. Turning back to the journal, she found passages describing eerie sounds that defied explanation. Low growls, indistinct murmurs, and the unsettling sensation of being watched from the shadows. Tommy had written of strange symbols carved into bark, of fleeting glimpses of a dark, shifting figure with glowing eyes. The more she read, the more the legend of the Jersey Devil felt like a mask for something far more terrifying. Determined not to let her brother's fate remain a mystery, Nell began copying the entries into her own notebook, piecing together the fragments of his final days. The forest outside seemed to lean in closer, its ancient breath heavy with secrets and menace. The boundary between myth and reality blurred as the journal's revelations settled in, driving Nell deeper into the heart of the Pine Barrens' shadowed enigma. The night stretched on, and with every turn of the page, the forest's whisper grew louder in her mind, a haunting refrain that promised both danger and the truth she so desperately sought. But the closer she drew to that truth, the more she felt the cold grip of something watching, waiting beneath the ancient pines. And she knew, without doubt, that nothing in the Pine Barrens would ever be the same again.